Okay, welcome back. In our last video, we talked about creating different user roles in the system. And that allowed when we log in with, say, user number 12, we log in, this one's an administrator, and that will take us to our administrator view where we can see all of our volunteers. But we also created another view, or sorry, another scenario where if we had a non-administrative user, they wouldn't be able to see that information. They would go straight to a view where they could log their hours. Now, the only problem that we had was if we hit the back button, it takes us back to seeing all these things, which they shouldn't be able to see because, they're just a volunteer. They're not an administrator. So on that scene, on that logging hours scene, we need to figure out, is the user that's loaded an administrator or not, and then treat the scene appropriately, or the view appropriately. And one of the other challenges we have is if we take a look at, let's go to our log hours view controller. If we look at this, when we load our, when we first go into this, what we have is this method called Preload Data, which loads in a volunteer. Now, there's kind of two use cases here. One use case is that a user is going in and logging their own hours. Another use case is that maybe an administrator is going in to log hours on behalf of a volunteer. Now, in that case, we cannot use the volunteer that's loaded to validate if they're an administrator or not to change the scene or the view appropriately. So what we need a way to always know who's logged into our system. And the way we're going to do that is actually by our login view controller. So when someone logs in, that's when we're going to set up who's logged in. And then we can always see, if that person's an administrator or are they just a regular volunteer. So let's look at our login view controller. When we log in, what we do is we connect to the database, and we using some of the utilities here, we basically figure out what the salt is, we figure out what the password is, and based on what the user has typed in, we try to create a new encrypted password, and we check, is it are they an administrative user or not? If they are, go to this view. If they're not an administrative user, but the passwords match between the interface and the database, then go to this log hours view. So in here, what we need to do is we need to set up a scenario where if the passwords are equal, the person's a valid login, in which case we should set up a sort of this logged in user. And the way that I'm going to handle that is actually with our scene changer object, because we always use the scene changer object to move from scene to scene to scene. So in order to do that, what I need to have an item or an instance variable of scene changer that all, sorry, it shouldn't be an instance variable, a global variable that all scene changers can access. And in order to do that, let's go to our scene changer view, sorry, our scene changer Java class here. And in here, we don't have any global variables today. So we can't store this sort of static, volunteer, be it an admin or a regular volunteer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say private static volunteer logged in user. Okay. So what's going to happen here is we will create a static logged in user, and that means anytime we open an instance of our scene changer, we can access this logged in user. And I go to insert code, getters and setters. Move this below our constructors. Okay, so this will always be able to get the logged in user, and this is going to set the logged in user. We could put some defensive practices in here, for example, forcing the user to, or the coder to actually put in the login view controller class, just to make sure that it's only happening in the login view controller. But for the purposes of this, we're just going to, we'll just set it up this way. So here, now that we have a scene changer object, right? And so this is in our login view controller, and we've created an instance of our volunteer, right? So we already have them as a variable that we can access. We can say sc dot, okay, let me hit save here. It wasn't. Here we can set logged in user as our volunteer. So now, even before we've actually validated if they have, actually, yeah, let's move that. We want some conditions here. If passwords match, then set the logged in user to be the volunteer that's logged in. Now, whenever we're using our scene changer, we can always find out about the logged in user. So in this log hours view, take a look at this. Log view. Just taking a minute to pop open here. Here we go. So in here, if I look at this button, I go down to code, it does not currently have an FX ID. So I can't refer to this button just yet, but I will be able to because we're going to give it one. So let's go to our controller here. This is a log hours view controller. And let's add okay, so now we can refer to this back button. And in our initialize method, right? So this is always run before before our view is set up. In here, here, even though we can assume it's an administrative user, now we can say scene changer get logged in user, right? So we can say if logged in user, and we can say is admin. So if they're an admin, actually we'll just say if they're not an admin, because by default, we can say back button set text to say so what we can do is we can, instead of saying a back button, we can go in and edit our profile maybe instead. So let's give this a little test drive. So we'll log in as a non-administrative user. Got ourselves a little error handling here. Okay, null pointer exception in the log hours view controller. So let's take a look on line 47. Here, back button. So in our log hours view, although we created our instance variable here, we did not actually go in here and set that appropriately. This is a non-administrative user. Going to now this button says edit. Now the challenge here is when I click it, it's still going to go to this. So what we really want it to do is take us to a screen like this. So all we have to do is when we say click on the cancel button. So before, right? Here, let's create a new scene changer, and we'll say if logged in user is admin. So if they're an admin, that's all we need to do. But if they're not an admin, then what we need to do is we need to say scene changer change scenes, but we're going to have to pass in our volunteer. And the view name that we want is going to be, I think it was new user view. We'll pass in our volunteer that we have, and we need to pass in the controller for that class. So we need to create an instance of that class to do that. So it's going to be new user view controller. Now will allow us to preload our volunteer. So let's hit play and see if that gives us what we want. Our edit button, if I click edit, now it takes us to edit volunteer, and it's pulled up our administrative user. And they could change their password or what have you at this point. Now if I hit cancel, we're gonna have the same problem again, where it takes us back to here. We're gonna deal with that in the next, well, actually, you know what? Let's just deal with it real quick right now. So let's go to our new user view controller and the cancel button. So when cancel button is pushed, okay, so it's going to look very similar to what we just did. In fact, if it is if they're an admin, go back to that table view. If they're not an admin, then we need to create an instance of our log hours view controller. Log hours view controller. And then we can go scene changer, change scenes. And our view is going to be log hours view.fxml. That'll be log hours. Pass in our volunteer again, and our controller is the one we just created. So now this should handle it well. So 13 and our password takes us to a log hours view. I click edit, brings me here. Let's make this last name. I didn't hook up this button yet. So let's just do cancel, and it brings us back to here. In the next video, what we'll do is we'll look at how do we handle the save and coming back to this view. Okay, thanks for joining.